So, beginning as usual with the chanting together of the homage, the refuges, and the 9 precepts. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranam gacchami. Dhammang saranam gacchami. Sanghang saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Dutiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Anatipata Viramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami. Adinadana Viramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami. Abrahmacharya Viramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami. Musawada Viramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami. Sura Miraya Majapamaratana Viramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami. Vikala Bhojana Viramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami. Nacha Gita Wadita Visukadasana Malaganda Vilepanna Dharana Mandana Vibhusanatana Viramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami. Uchasayana Mahasayana Viramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami. Metta Sahagatena Cetasa Sabhavantang Lokang Paritva Viharami. Idame Silam Maga Pala Jnanasa Pachayo Hotu. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So today is Wednesday, January 29th. Already we're 1 week into this retreat. And I want to speak today about the skillful use of energy and effort in the context of Metta Bhavana. The Buddha said, and many of our Mahasi teachers reiterate over and over that virya, effort, is the root of all accomplishment. You can't accomplish anything, worldly or unworldly, without effort. And in the Pali texts, in the Nikayas, virya, effort, is one of the most mentioned mental factors. The Buddha spoke about it over and over and over again. And use of effort, the skillful use of effort, is an art. It's not a simple linear thing where more is better. The Buddha may have spoken of it again and again and again, but we have to learn in our practice and continue to learn in our practice how much energy to use and how to balance it. This is something that we polish in our practice. It's something we learn at the very beginning, we relearn all the way through, and polish all the way through to the very end of the path. It's a continual learning. So this word virya that we use for effort, this Pali word, has as its root vira, as in my name, that Sayalay Upandita gave me, meaning heroic courage. Or it says in the Pali English dictionary, the state of a strong person. It has as its inner meaning vigor, energy, exertion, effort, based in courage. The English translation of virya, there are many English translations of virya. The basic ones are energy and effort. But also, you see sometimes in translations, strength, vigor, persistence, perseverance, and courage. And each of these less common translations capture some aspect of virya, that sense of untiring, persistent effort in the face of challenge. It has a quality of firmness, steadiness, strength, and that inner sense of courage I really love in the context of this metta bhavana, because courage in English comes from the French word for heart, cœur. So it's that sense of a heart that is willing to be energized by challenge, that meets challenge, that doesn't retreat, that is inspired in the face of challenge. Retreating in the face of difficulty is the opposite. But this virya, this courageous effort, stands firm and steady and quiet, taking difficulty as an opportunity to learn, to grow. So the skillful use of effort is a basic component of the path. And when we think about the Noble Eightfold Path, one limb of the Eightfold Path, Samavayama, is often translated as right effort. It's effort in a different sense, but I want to speak about it briefly because how we use effort, I'll speak about that more, is central to balance. So Samavayama, right effort, is not about how much effort we use. It's arousing effort in the service of a particular direction of practice and life. It's based in the aspect of right view that understands the difference between wholesome and unwholesome. And it's fourfold. So, with regards to wholesome states, it's developing wholesome states that have not yet arisen and maintaining wholesome states that have arisen. And with regard to unwholesome states, it's restraint around unwholesome states that have not yet arisen and abandoning unwholesome states that have arisen. So, this fourfold right effort is the use of energy to do these four things, to restrain and abandon unwholesome states, to develop and maintain wholesome ones. So, taking first the unwholesome states that have not yet arisen are prevented from arising by restraint. For example, we just took the precepts. That's restraint. That's taking on a practice that inclines away from any habits that we might have to indulge in unwholesome action or speech and ensure that they don't arise, or do our best to ensure they don't arise. And in the context of the practice, we've spoken a little bit about restraint of the senses. This can make a huge difference to the continuity of our practice in our general activities and in walking meditation. So we cannot prevent seeing and hearing. These are natural phenomena. However, we don't have to listen and look. These are very different things. Seeing is very different than looking. Hearing is very different than listening. So restraint of the senses means to just leave it as seeing, seeing, hearing, hearing, rather than seeing, oh, what's that? I think I'll look at it. And then looking at it. And we might need not even have that thought. It might just be automatic. The same with some sound. So restraint of the senses allows us to develop a continuity of cultivating metta because the mind is less distracted. So that first aspect of restraint keeps unwholesome mental habits from coming to the surface. It does not feed them in any way. Sometimes, of course, we're human beings. Eh, yeah, sometimes we didn't have sense restraint or some unwholesome habitual mental state arises and comes into our experience. Then right effort is to abandon that, not to suppress, not to have any aversion about, but simply, very directly, to just put it down. Right effort is rooted in wisdom. For example, if you pick up something super hot, like a hot, we said, hot baked potato or something, it doesn't take any thought to drop it. There's just this instant, ugh, that was hot. When we know the danger of unwholesome states, it's easier to put them down. So this is one reason it says in the Visuddhimagga that one of the things one should do at the very beginning of cultivating metta is to reflect about the danger of anger, which is metta's opposite. When you know the danger of anger, you're less likely to keep indulging in it. You're less likely to hold it onto it and get burned by it. Just putting it down. And of course, there are other unwholesome states that can come up in practice. Any form of greed, aversion, illusion, lobha, dosa, moha, refined or gross. So abandoning, putting them aside, and simply going back to cultivating the metta phrase is right effort in the context of this practice. So we use energy to first acknowledge that these unwholesome states have come up, and then taking up the metta instead, just parking whatever that unwholesome state was, putting it down, putting aside. Not the phrase that people use a lot is letting go. I have to let go, or I should let go. Hmm. That is actually a way of saying something that leads to more of an unbalanced pushing aside. I have to let it go. Letting it be there is probably a better way of putting that. Just let it be. Don't get involved. That's all. Just put it down. Let it be there. Take up the metta instead. And that taking up of the metta can take quite a lot of energy sometimes because unwholesome states can have a real gravity field. We might want to be angry. We might want to indulge in the near enemy of metta and some sentimental attachment. That's an old habit for many of us, most of us. So it takes energy to say, no, I'm just going to put it down and incline the mind to metta. Put this down. Take this up, the Buddha said. I really love this. Just put this down, take this up. That's what this practice does again and again and again. Putting the unwholesome down, taking up the wholesome. And the metta phrase replaces whatever has been running through the mind that is rooted in greed, aversion, or delusion. So, right effort in the sense of restraint and abandoning in the metta practice is quite direct. And we've spoken already about what right effort looks like in this case of wholesome states. So, giving the conditions for wholesome states to arise by themselves. That's the development, repeating the phrase over and over again, and maintaining the continuity of that over and over and over again. Giving a relaxed attention to the development of the continuity of the metta phrase and the continuity of connection is right effort in the context of this practice. That's what develops unarisen metta and maintains the arisen metta. So, right effort in any context is not about how much effort we use, but to what end? What are we feeding and what are we starving? We starve the unwholesome states, we don't feed them. We encourage, feed the wholesome ones. A Dhammapada verse that many of you know very well describes this very succinctly. Dhammapada 183, cultivate the wholesome, refrain from the unwholesome, purify the hearts. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. This is a universal teaching of all the Buddhas, is another translation. So the practice is not complicated. Right effort here is not complicated. Cultivate the wholesome, refrain from the unwholesome. And of course, this is what takes energy. This is why we need to use energy. Another Dhammapada verse I really like, Dhammapada 163. The Buddha says, it's easy to do what isn't good and things that harm oneself. It's very difficult to do things that are beneficial and good. I really love that. It speaks to the power of habit. And when we've over lifetimes cultivated, not we, but when over lifetimes unwholesome habits have been cultivated, it takes steady, persistent, courageous effort to cultivate new habits. And this is really refers to that courage aspect of virya, skillfully facing challenge as we grow in the practice. Skillfully facing challenge as we go against the stream of habits. And particularly mental habit. This practice and right effort in this practice and balanced effort in this practice is definitely work of the mind. In the Majjhima Nikaya, in Majjhima 56, the Buddha speaks about mental action as being more reprehensible or dangerous than verbal action or physical action because two reasons. The first is intention. Intention arises in the mind, intention to indulge in unwholesome habits, for example. These arise in the mind. They have to arise in the mind before they come out of our mouths or our bodies do something to harm. So, also because of kamma, intention or kamma depends upon intention. So, mental, the intention that arises in the mind is what creates kamma, what causes fruit of kamma to arise in the future. So The wellspring of all speech and action is the mind, and the wellspring, the root of all habit is the mind. So we have to take care of this mind. It is our doesn't belong to us, but it's our responsibility. And this is where the practice works. So in the context of the practice, we're constantly replacing these old habits, perhaps rooted in greed, aversion, and delusion, with a new habit of inclining to metta, connecting to metta, and maintaining the metta, feeding the metta that has arisen. I say perhaps unwholesome because often it's the experience of people who have done a lot of vipassana practice to have a very strong habit of paying attention in a vipassana way. This is, of course, not at all unwholesome. And there can be the experience of fighting the metta practice because the mind wants to go back to its habit of vipassana. So developing a habit of metta doesn't always mean going against a stream of unwholesome habit. It could be going against a well-established habit of vipassana. And because both metta and vipassana are wholesome, it's useful to have fluency in both. I speak of that in terms of language because it's like learning a new language, learning a new habit of mind. Having strength in both is incredibly useful and very onward leading. So going against the stream of old habit often means unwholesome habit, but sometimes also the wholesome habits of vipassana. And still, all of that takes effort. So, how much effort to use? This is the eternal question. The Buddha spoke in the Majjhima Nikaya in a quite a famous passage, the Sutta to Sona, about using a metaphor of tuning the strings of a vina. And any of you who play musical instruments understand that before you play the instrument, you must tune it. And the Buddha said, if the strings are too tight, can't make good music. If the strings are too loose, you can't make good music. Likewise, in the practice. And this is from the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Sixes. He's speaking to Sona, who is a monk now, but used to be a musician, using this metaphor of the strings of a vina. He says, Sona, if energy is aroused too forcefully, this leads to restlessness. And if energy is too lax, this leads to laziness. Therefore, Sona, resolve on a balance of energy, achieve evenness of the faculties, and take up the object of practice. Just as one tunes an instrument, we tune our mind. This is just a wonderful metaphor because it's not possible to attain a balance of effort and have that only have to do that once, and you've got it once, it's done. Just as with an instrument, every time we practice, we have to tune the mind. And tuning the mind is a constant development It's a development of, it's really an art of listening, of paying attention to our inner strings, to inner circumstances. It's not only a one-time thing, unfortunately. And that, as I said, that art is refined from the very beginning of the practice to its very end. One thing to remember in the doing of this, in this development of balanced effort, is to remember that effort is a variable mental factor, or described in this way in the Abhidhamma Buddhist psychology. It meaning it can be used to skillful ends or to unskillful ends. It's not always wholesome. Depending on how much we use and how we're using it, we can be cultivating the wholesome or cultivating the unwholesome. This is why it's such an art. Unlike mindfulness, mindfulness is simple. You can never have too much. That's it. You can definitely have too much energy, too much effort, using it in the wrong way to the wrong ends. So noticing this, noticing how we are using effort to what ends, remembering these four aspects of right effort. So most basically, looking in that through that lens is the effort we are making being used towards unwholesome ends or wholesome ends. For example, when we're sitting, are we feeding a habit of just sitting and letting the mind wander? That's unwholesome. Or are we coming back to the phrase, making a little effort to come back to the phrase again and again and again? So, most basically, to notice, what are we doing when we sit and walk? And then, if we're feeding or practicing towards wholesome ends, how are we using the effort? Is it skillful or unskillful? Are we applying effort in a balanced way or not? Skillful use of effort leads to joyful interest. Unskillful use of effort leads to discouragement, frustration, doubt. So it really requires that we pay attention to this. This applies to both the amount of effort we use, but primarily the attitude behind the effort we expend. The skillfulness or unskillfulness of our use of effort is rooted in whatever chaitana, whatever intention is behind that effort. So the first thing to do when, even if we're applying effort to wholesome ends, to notice, why are we doing what we're doing? What are we doing what we're doing for? Is, for example, there any agenda behind the well-wishing, the repetition of the phrase? Any internal agenda? Any external agenda? Do you want something in the external world to change? Do you want something inside to be different? Some mental state to go away, some experience to go away? That's one thing. That's one way of looking, or one thing to look at. Another thing to notice is, are you bargaining? So, for example, are you cultivating metta so that something will happen or stop happening? That's another aspect of what I was just mentioning. Oh, I'll say the metta phrase so that I'll feel better. Yeah. Is there attachment to some experience you want to recreate? Maybe something happened yesterday or 2 days ago or this morning, and you want it back. And you know exactly how that started, so you do that again and again, trying to make that state of that experience come back. So you want that experience to come in the future, and you practice so that it arises again. Some pleasant state of concentration or pleasant state of heart. Is there attachment to some present moment experience that is arising that you're hanging on to for dear life so that it doesn't go away? You don't want to lose it, and so you hang on to it. These experiences that I've just described are rooted in greed and rooted in attachment and rooted in aversion, various forms of them. This is never useful. And you see how difficult it is to find that aspect of right effort that is cultivating and maintaining wholesome states. I'll have more to say about this a little later, but it's easy to rationalize being attached to some wholesome state, some pleasant meditative state, and to practice in order that that arise, thinking, oh, this is wholesome. I want it to arise so that I do this so that in order to. That's a very nice rationalization of greed. Practicing in order that, so that we have a certain experience, is an agenda. Especially obvious when we notice the state of mind that comes with all of these versions of greed. The mind gets tight. The mind is leaning forward into the practice, wanting something to arise, as opposed to just resting back, trusting the steady repetition of the phrase and allowing those states to arise by themselves. When there's an over efforting, there's always tightness. And we can use a lot of energy, really a ton of energy, to make something arise or to try to make something arise. It's exhausting. It's really exhausting. I want to read a quote from Sayadaw U Tejaniya about this because I think it's a very good description of this phenomena. He says, yogis are often too tense because they're practicing with wrong attitudes, wrong views, or wrong ideas. So there is wrong effort. They're always striving to get places. The problem is that most of them are not skillful. They don't know their state of mind or their situation or what they're capable of. All they know is that they want to get it. And that's why they overexert themselves. By contrast, skillful effort in order to maintain wholesome states that arisen or to cause unarisen wholesome states to arise is always patient, kind, open, receptive, relaxed. Simply saying the phrase, simply coming back to it with as much connection as is possible without getting tight. That is enough. Most of the energy we use in the practice is, or most of the energy we use in the practice skillfully is for the purpose of remembering, returning, coming back, starting over. Metta effort is used to support continuity. That's all. Not to create metta, as we've said. We can't create it, it creates itself. But the continuity of inclination and the continuity of connection is what does that work. It's not a forceful, ego based striving or creating. Frequent question, and a very good question, is how can I tell if I'm using effort skillfully or not? Because the mind is very sneaky. We're told to, strive to succeed in the practice. So we do. We strive. We make a lot of effort. So monitor a number of things are very useful in this regard. Pay attention to, are you becoming more energized through the effort you're making or exhausted, headachy? Sometimes when people are over efforting, they're trying too hard to create something. By the end of the day, there's utter exhaustion and there might even be a headache. It's like, oh, working really hard to create concentration rather than just in a relaxed way, but a steady, determined, kind, relaxed way to come back again and again. Is the mind getting tighter or is there more relaxed openness? Tightness of mind, that pressured feeling, is one indication of wrong effort and over efforting. Another aspect of this is, do you feel like you're competing with yourself? Or do you feel like you're competing with other people? Do you feel really pressured to come into the hall because you have to be there before everybody else, or you want to be there before you were yesterday? Anything based in comparison with yourself or somebody else is wrong effort. We do the best we can and never mind what it was like yesterday, never mind what the person next to us is doing. And please hold beautiful ideals lightly. We have kind of ideals, values that are very useful of what good practice should look like. And then we try to force ourselves to do that without checking in to see if we're actually capable of it, whether we have the physical energy, the mental energy, paramis to do that. So pay attention to how things really are for yourself and direct the mind to the goal, but don't try to force yourself to get there today, tomorrow, or the next day. Just keep taking the small steps you take with each repetition of the phrase, with each reconnection. And that's enough. So, related to this pressure is the mind that says, I should do it in a certain way, or I must do this in a certain way. Practice should look like. Or the opposite of that is, oh, this doesn't look good. I'm not fitting that ideal. Mm, that's not right effort either. That's pressure. The opposite of both of these, this competition mind or the pressure mind, is joyful interest and trust. Simply rejoicing in the beauty of metta and inclining to that as best as you can is what feeds right effort. So monitoring in this way, looking to see how's your energy? Is there pressure you're putting on yourself? Are you competing with other people or with an ideal? Is the mind getting tighter or quieter, calmer, more at ease? So these are some very useful ways of monitoring our attitude. Monitoring the amount of effort we make is harder, actually. This is a lot of the art of practice because it's impossible to give a quantitative answer. You have to have X amount of effort, and that's what right effort is. A skillful amount of effort is not static. As I said before, more is not necessarily better. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And what works for you today, this afternoon, this sitting, may not be what worked in the last sitting, this morning, or yesterday. And it may not be like that tomorrow. This is the tuning aspect of the mind. You have to constantly check in with the mind and body. What's appropriate right now, given everything, given health, given physical conditions, given mental conditions, given what's arising, and what's skillful in one person may not be skillful in another. So you can't observe other people and go, oh, that person is just napping. They're a bad yogi. Well, maybe not. Maybe that person was so driven and tight that this is actually a step forward for them. Likewise, you can't see somebody who's, looks like, the perfect practice machine and they're always sitting and walking and sitting and walking and sitting and walking and they're always the first one in here and the last one out and say, oh, that's what right effort looks like. Well, maybe they're just totally on an ego trip, feeding unwholesome states. You can't tell from the outside what right effort looks like for anybody. So please don't do that comparing thing because it's just not useful. There's no way of knowing. So there's no recipe here because of the way skillful effort and the amount of skillful effort changes constantly. This is the art that we develop, and it's an art of connecting with ourselves, our inner and outer conditions, and being responsive to that, being sensitive to that, being willing to back off if we need to, letting go of our ideas of perfection in the practice and just doing what is appropriate for ourselves in this moment. This takes so much patience. Right effort is rooted in honesty and patience and humility. This is one reason I think at the beginning of the Metta Sutta, where the Buddha says, this is what's done by one who's skilled in what's good. Skill in goodness is skill in right effort. He's humble, very honest, and patient. Observing our inner landscape and being willing to be flexible, responsive to that, practicing in accord with what is happening in this moment, being willing to rest if we need to rest, to back off if we need to back off. Maybe it doesn't look so good, but that's what we need to do. Or maybe stretching ourselves a little bit, being willing to see what happens if we're tired and want to go to bed early and just practice 5 minutes more and see what happens with a spirit of interest, curiosity, experimentation. What happens if I stretch myself a little bit? So both ends of this energy continuum need to be acknowledged, worked with, and trusting that the very small moments of effort that we make to come back again and again and again accumulates. This practice is cumulative. Each moment we say the phrase, each moment we reconnect, each moment we restrain the mind from wandering or feed a moment of connection adds up to a lot. This is what does the work of the practice, as we've said. Trusting those small moments. They're so humble, they're so nothing. You don't think anything of it, saying the phrase. But that's so important, each moment of that. And it doesn't feel like anything special. That's why that story that Maria told about Sharon Salzberg I find so wonderful because she thought, oh, what am I doing saying this phrase? This is so stupid. And after 5 days, finding, oh, actually, something happened here. One of the things that's important to remember about metta bhavana, the cultivation of metta, is so much is happening in the background. We can't really tell the change that's happening. We can't really observe it So it's not obvious. We might not even know anything has changed until something happens. And often this is after a retreat, something happens. Or even during a retreat. Somebody was mentioning the other day, something arose that would normally have caused them to really be reactive, but that didn't happen. That's how metta works. It's so kind of in the background, humble, quiet. So we go out and somebody says or done something that would normally make us really angry, and the thought spontaneous arises, oh, may they be at ease. May they be safe. Some metta phrase might come up instead of anger. So the cumulative effect of saying all these phrases, the creating of this new habit, you'll see later whether it's done any good or not. And we hear all the time, oh, my goodness, I had no idea. I left after the retreat and it's really been life changing. Yeah, that's what happens. We don't think anything's happening here. And then we go out and we see just how it's rearranged the mind, just how deeply entrenched this habit has become, one phrase at a time. So please trust this cumulative aspect of right effort in the metta practice, inclining again and again to the wholesome, connecting with it. It's powerful. So I want to close with another Dhammapada verse. This is Dhammapada 122. Don't disregard merit thinking. It won't come back to me. With each small drop of water, even a large jar is filled. Little by little, a sage is filled with merit. So little by little, we become filled with metta, one phrase at a time, inclining to the wholesome, refraining from the unwholesome, purifying the mind. Thank you for your kind attention, everybody. So continuing the practice.